Until Election Day, President Joe Biden announcing he is ending his re-election campaign. The president released the decision today in a statement at 1:46 p.m. Eastern Time. Mr. Biden saying, quote, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." In a separate social media post at about 2:13 Eastern, the president endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris, to replace him as his party's standard bearer ahead of its national convention, which begins August 19th in Chicago. And then we heard from the vice president, who wrote, "I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. Over the past year, I have traveled across the country talking with Americans about the clear choice in this momentous election. And that is what I will continue to do in the days and weeks ahead. I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda." It should be noted, we now just have 107 days until Election Day. And so Kamala Harris says, "Together we will fight, and together we will win." Now, the president is at home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, this weekend recovering from COVID. He is expected to address the nation later this week. He's the first president since Lyndon Johnson in 1968 to decline to seek a second term. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is at the White House. And Nancy, what do we know about how the president came to this historic decision?
Well, he came to this decision, or within the past 24 hours. It has been days, if not weeks, of White House officials from the president on down insisting that he was in it to win it, that he was tuning out the doubters, and that he was going to win this race. Until this morning, when we started to get word that potentially he had a change of heart. Right around 2 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon, he made it official in an announcement to the American people. We're told that just a few minutes before that, he told his senior advisors. Before that, though, holed up in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. He was there with just a few members of his inner circle, including his deputy chief of staff, his longtime right-hand woman, Annie Tomasini, two of his longtime senior advisors, Mike Donnellan and Steve Rischetti. All those doubters, it appears, just got too loud, and he started to have a change of heart. After he told the American people that he had decided to bow out of the race, he threw his support behind Vice President Harris. We got word, Nora, from the president's brother earlier today, saying that the president's health, he believes, was a factor in his decision. But just a short time ago, I heard from a source close to the Biden family, and they said that Frank Biden, the president's younger brother, is an alcoholic, that he hasn't spoken to the president in weeks, and that the president's health had nothing to do with his decision to leave the race.
Nancy Cordes at the White House with that information. Nancy, thank you. Congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane is here with us as well. And shortly after President Biden endorsed his vice president, we heard from a number of prominent Democrats. Scott, is the Democratic Party coalescing behind Kamala Harris?
A big chunk already has. She picked up a block of Senate endorsements and picked them up quickly, nearly 24 by our CBS News count. And it's some of the lions of the U.S. Senate. Patty Murray, third in the line of presidential succession. She chairs the Appropriations Committee. Mark Warner of Virginia chairs the Intelligence Committee. Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts has her finger on the pulse of the progressive wing of the caucus. And then all the House groups, Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, and from some of the other names we've heard associated with potential candidacies, including Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. And there on the screen, some of those members of the House January 6th committee who spent so much time investigating 2020 and the efforts of Donald Trump to overturn the election. And if this all sounds familiar, this broad base of voices in the Democratic Party, it was a broad base of voices in the Democratic Party calling on President Biden to withdraw. This in a way, has unified an often fractious Democratic caucus.
So much has changed in just a short period of time. Scott McFarland, thank you so much. Want to bring in John Dickerson, who joins us now. And John, it's hard to overstate what a seismic event this is. How does this change the contours of this presidential race?
Oof. Well, we're still figuring that all out, Nora. I mean, one of the ways is, first, the Democratic Party has to figure out how to get unified. They have to go through that series of issues. And we've been talking about the timeline. You mentioned LBJ. You know, when Johnson dropped out in 1968, he wasn't essentially the party nominee. I mean, Joe Biden is the nominee, which means the entire Democratic process made him the party nominee. To unwind that means taking care of some sensitivities and bruised feelings that might be out there as a way to get the party unified to then go forward. So the first big task is staying unified, and the second is figuring out how to take the fight to Donald Trump. Democrats are terrified that basically since the first debate, the only debate, 27th of June, they've been losing ground to Donald Trump, not able to take the case to him. The Republicans just emerged from their convention highly unified. When can the Democratic ticket form itself, which means, of course, that crucial vice presidential decision, but then when can it start prosecuting the case against Donald Trump, which it has not been able to do basically since the end of June?
John Dickerson, thank you. Want to bring in Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. And Margaret, if Kamala Harris secures the Democratic nomination, she would be the first woman of color to become a major party presidential nominee. How does this change the substance of this race, the discussion of the issues that are before the American people?
Well, Democrats have argued that they have the policy position to win, even if they didn't have the energy and the unity. Well, now they can try to bring all together, and with Kamala Harris as vice president, put reproductive health care as the top issue that she has been the messenger on for Joe Biden, who is not comfortable messaging around that because of his personal beliefs about abortion. He's made that clear. She will put that at the fore and be able to talk about it in a compelling way against a candidate who celebrates having put justices on the court who overturned Roe versus Wade, even though Donald Trump's current position is that he sent it back to the states. She will bring that front and center. She can also help to perhaps get a second look for some Democrats in key states like Michigan, where there had been concern in particular about the president's perceived lack of empathy in terms of the loss of Palestinian life. We've seen in our CBS polling that this extends beyond Arab and Muslim voters. It was very resonant with black voters in particular. And she has been able to have a softer message, a more humanitarian message on that front. That would also be front and center. By the way, she's also 59 years old. So in that conversation about generational change, she can say she is that. There are a lot of negatives that you will hear some of her critics outlay in the next few days, including some people who may want to challenge her in the coming days. But that's the case that Democrats hope will be a winning one, that she can lean into those more progressive platform issues for the party.
And Margaret, we are just hearing from Jill Biden's spokesperson that she was supportive, whatever road he chose, that she's always been his biggest believer, champion, and always on his side. And they're some 50 years together. But this is obviously painful for the entire Biden family.
It has to be. And we've seen messages, including from Hunter Biden, President Biden's surviving son, who has been very much in a harsh spotlight because of his legal troubles. Remember his case that just in the month of June, one of the issues that had to have weighed on Joe Biden as a father to see his son convicted in regard to gun charges, who also faces charges in September. Those don't all go away, but perhaps the shifting here and the conversations with the family, all of that has to have weighed on him. And it is interesting as he puts really front and center his family so often, 50-year spouse, saying she stood by him.
Margaret Brennan, thank you. I want to bring in Robert Costa. And Robert, a lot of the discussion is about Joe Biden and his legacy, protecting that legacy. That's in part, I think, why he chose not to seek re-election. He is throwing his weight behind his vice president, Kamala Harris. But is it clear tonight that she has the nomination? Who else may jump in?
We're looking at a Democratic Party that's convulsing tonight. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who just registered as an independent, a longtime centrist Democrat. CBS News has now learned he is considering re-registering as a member of the Democratic Party to consider standing for the Democratic presidential nomination, in effect challenging Vice President Harris for that nomination. He has not made a final decision, based on our conversations with people close to him, but he is considering it tonight. He's talking to donors. He's talking to party officials. His consideration underscores how some Democrats are nervous about Vice President Harris's ability to beat former President Donald Trump, who I just spoke with about an hour or two ago. He told CBS News that he's prepared to have a political onslaught against Vice President Harris or whomever emerges as the nominee. I asked him, are you ready to debate Vice President Harris? He says, not at all, because I'm not even sure I'm going to be running against her. Let's see what happens.
And Nora, just to give you a sense of how fast-moving this is, Senator Joe Manchin was on Face the Nation at 10:30 this morning and said, it's time for a new generation, forget about me. Between 10:30 a.m. this morning and right now, there is a reconsideration.
That's like a month ago in politics, Margaret.
That's right. Well, so much has changed just today. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Weijia Jiang, because she is outside the vice president's residence. And Weijia, what do we know about what the vice president is doing at this hour?
Well, Nora, we know that she is in Washington, D.C., of course, but we have not seen her in public at all today. She spoke with President Biden earlier when he called her before he made the big announcement. They had a private conversation, and then she spent the day reaching out to members of Congress, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And, of course, we just saw in the past week how powerful these congressional leaders can be, and she certainly knows that, having served in the Senate. So she made immediate direct outreach to them to try to shore up support. And, you know, she has been talking to advisors, too, to try to process all of this and to try to answer the million-dollar question that everybody wants to know, which is, who is she going to pick as a running mate? And, you know, that question is really, who can bring something to the ticket that she cannot? Who can bring what Joe Biden could? Of course, there's huge overlap there. And who can offer something to those voters in the critical battleground states that will likely determine this race? And so there have been many names that have already emerged, Nora, including Democratic governors. Roy Cooper of North Carolina. We should point out that they just stumped together on the trail in Fayetteville, North Carolina this past week. Andy Beshear of Kentucky, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who she also spoke with today, according to an aide. But she could also pick somebody in the Biden cabinet, because she is not only running on her personal record, she is running on the record of the Biden-Harris administration. So if you were to choose a secretary, Pete Buttigieg, Gina Raimondo, these are people who have already been out spending the better part of the past year campaigning for President Biden. And so today, the team says there's no timeline, no discussions in public about when she might choose. But of course, Nora, we know it has to be soon.
Weijia Jiang, outside the vice president's residence, thank you very much. Want to bring in Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. He serves on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You said the clock was ticking for President Biden to reassure voters. Your reaction tonight to what has happened?
Well, this is an extraordinary moment. It's a moment where we are watching a true American patriot, somebody that has given his entire life to this country, make an incredibly selfless decision. He knows that the number one priority is beating Donald Trump, and Joe Biden made the decision tonight that Kamala Harris has the best chance of being able to rescue our democracy from potential doom if Donald Trump becomes president. It's a hard decision for President Biden. Why? Because arguably he's the most successful president of our lifetime, rescuing this country from the pandemic, passing legislation that nobody thought was possible until Joe Biden was president, the biggest infrastructure investment in the country's history, the first gun bill of any consequence in 30 years. Inarguably, he has had a really remarkable record of legislative success. And so to walk away from that is very, very difficult. But there were and are a lot of voters who were looking for the torch to be passed to a new generation. I think they're going to be very excited by Kamala Harris, somebody that I've served with, somebody who I am eager and enthusiastic to support. And I think it's remarkable tonight that you have seen such a rush of support to her just hours after this announcement, which, by the way, was not previewed to any members of the Senate or governors. You saw this organic growth of support for her. I think, as you mentioned, about half of my colleagues in the Senate have already endorsed her. That didn't come through any coordinated effort. That came because we just all know her, and we think that she's going to be a tremendous commander in chief.
So, Senator, you believe that the Democratic Party is coalescing behind the vice president and she will not face any significant challenge?
Well, it's too early to know whether there will be any challenge to her, but I see right now a pretty remarkable building of support for the vice president. She is ready to do this job. She has been side by side with President Biden, a big part of his successes. I've traveled with her around the world. I've seen how she has helped reshape America's image around the world in the wake of the destruction that was done to it by Donald Trump. So I'm pretty confident tonight that she's going to be our nominee. I think we would be better off as a party if we were able to get behind her. But obviously, it's early moments, so time will tell if she's the only candidate.
Senator, how do you hope that Vice President Harris will prosecute the case against Donald Trump?
Well, she is a prosecutor. And so this is a pretty clear contrast. A prosecutor running against a felon. Kamala Harris, who as California's Attorney General and Senator and Vice President has stood up to the big banks in the billionaire class. Donald Trump, who promises in his second term to give another massive tax break to those same people. Kamala Harris, who's spent her career trying to bring people together, trying to heal divisions. Donald Trump, who's continuing to divide us. I think she is going to be an incredibly effective messenger. I think even during this very tough time, these last few weeks when people were watching her more carefully than ever, she was at her best. And so I think that tells you with it when the moment comes, when the stakes get the highest, Kamala Harris is at her best. I think this country is going to be really interested, I think really surprised at the Kamala Harris that they're going to meet over the course of the next several weeks and months.
Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ahead, a closer look at President Biden's storied career in politics and the legacy he'll leave behind.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Ready, set, go!
All right. Okay, let's go.
Let's just start at the beginning.
The clock, it's ticking.
Did they prevent justice?
You're not answering my question.
They lied? What is at stake?
That's a great question.
Great question.
What kind of needs are you sensing here?
You want to start in alphabetical order or numerical?
You don't want to talk
fine,
about what I do.
Fine. Never mind. I don't care. Wow, this is really, really hot. How fast do you think you were going?
You think that Mr. Putin's responsible?
I'm sure that he's responsible.
Are you safe here?
Are you ready for some tough questions?
It's the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years.
I view it as a significant challenge.
Why won't you say the word crisis?
Whoa!
See it? It's right here.
What's the likelihood you and I have been hacked by China?
110%.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
This generation of robots is going to be different.
That's a hell of a way to get into a country.
It seems unbelievable.
This is mind-blowing.
Breathtaking.
It's time for the new season of the CBS News original.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places. Bright, shiny faces.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Put me in the game, coach.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
The best interviews feel like it's just a conversation with a neighbor.
Hey.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask a question that is the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'll see you in the morning.
Your age makes the choice of your vice president all the more important. Why do you think Senator Harris would be ready to step in and become commander-in-chief if something were to happen to you?
Number one, her values. Number two, she is smart as a devil. Number three, she has a backbone like a ramrod. Number four, she is really principled. And number five, she has had significant experience in the largest state in the union, running the Justice Department. It's only second in size to the United States Justice Department. And, obviously, I hope that never becomes a question.
That was from my 60 Minutes interview with then-candidate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 2020, laying out why he says Harris was the right choice for VP. Biden's career goes back more than 50 years to 1972 when he was elected as one of the youngest senators. CBS's Major Garrett has a look back.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
Joe Biden's presidency began on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, where, only days before, America bore witness to insurrection.
We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities.
The day before he was inaugurated, Biden marked 400,000 U.S. COVID-19 deaths. Less than 5 weeks later, he mourned 500,000 American casualties.
That's more lives lost to this virus than any other nation on earth.
Biden's gesture illustrated an unadorned empathy that flowed through his entire political life, an emotive approach that seemed to fit a fitful time.
To heal, we must remember. It's hard sometimes to remember. But that's how we heal.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was born in 1942. When the economy collapsed in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and his father lost his job, the Bidens moved to Delaware.
My dad had an expression. He said, Joey, it's not a question of succeeding whether you get knocked down, it's how quickly you get up.
Biden played football at the University of Delaware and attended law school at Syracuse University. By 1972,
if you like what you see, help me out. If not, vote for the other fellow.
He was elected to the United States Senate as a long shot, tell it like it is, 29-year-old.
I think one of the reasons I won is they have more confidence in me than with other people that I will say what I think.
Weeks later, his wife Nelia and their daughter were killed in a traffic accident that also injured sons Beau and Hunter.
I felt like a piece of me died.
Biden took the oath of office in a hospital. A single-father senator, Biden commuted from Wilmington to Washington aboard Amtrak to be home with his kids at night. He met Jill Jacobs, a teacher, on a blind date in 1975. They married 2 years later.
Everyone knows I love her more than she loves me.
My name is Joe Biden. I want to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States.
He ran for president in 1987, but dropped out after being accused of plagiarism. A year later, he suffered 2 brain aneurysms, but would later write he had no fear of dying.
Judge Thomas.
Biden chaired the Clarence Thomas Supreme Court confirmation hearing in 1991, and during the 2020 campaign, he apologized to Anita Hill, who accused Thomas of sexual harassment, but faced scrutiny and hostility.
To this day, I regret I couldn't come up with a way to get her the kind of hearing she deserved.
He drafted the 1994 crime bill. It pushed crime down, but incarceration rates up.
Hi, Penny. I'm Joe Biden, running for president.
His 2008 White House campaign went nowhere.
The vast majority of the people in Iowa haven't made up their mind yet.
When they did,
Joe Biden!
Barack Obama named Biden his running mate. In the White House, Biden oversaw stimulus spending and jumped ahead of the president by endorsing gay marriage.
What this is all about is a simple proposition. Who do you love?
Biden told President Obama to wait for better confirmation before launching the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Memorably, he said this about the passage of Obamacare. Biden was known for verbal gaffes, some innocent,
We choose truth over facts.
others less so.
They're going to put you all back in chains.
Biden passed on another run for the presidency in 2016 after his son Beau died of brain cancer. In 2020, he finished 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire, but bounced back to win South Carolina.
So all those who have been knocked down, counted out, left behind, let me say to you, this is your campaign.
For months, as the pandemic worsened, Biden stumped virtually from his basement.
This is a war against this virus.
Let me introduce to you.
Biden made history by picking California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate, the first woman of color nominated by a major party.
Kamala knows how to govern. She knows how to make the hard calls. She's ready to do this job on day one.
That November, Biden defeated President Trump by 7 million votes, and he brushed aside Mr. Trump's false claims of fraud and prepared to bring the pandemic to heel. In his first 100 days, Mr. Biden accelerated vaccine distribution and strong-armed a $2 trillion COVID relief plan through a Congress with slender Democratic majorities. Mr. Biden, the first pre-baby boom president since 1993, approached the nation as a soft-spoken healer, but governed more progressively even than President Obama. A career politician soaked in Washington for some 50 years, Mr. Biden made his presidency a transition between the nation's older, racially calloused past and its softer, youthful, and more inclusive future.
We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America. None. The Honorable Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Biden appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court.
Okay, here we go.
And signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law.
Bravo.
However, a chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, coupled with inflation concerns and doubts about his comparatively lenient border policies, yielded unrelenting low approval ratings. Throughout his bid for re-election, Biden fought hard and spent tens of millions of dollars just to try to stay tied in the polls with former President Trump.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
After what many in his campaign and top Democrats regarded as a disastrous first debate performance, Biden could not stop the erosion of support among lawmakers and top donors. After ignoring pressure to drop out for more than 3 weeks, Biden announced his exit from the race shortly after the Republican National Convention. Biden frequently embraced optimism for America, and at times it sounded like his own internal fight against those who bet against him.
We are the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. And let's stay together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Biden, in the end, was persuaded to preserve his legacy rather than risk defeat for himself and Democrats nationwide. Steeped in the hard realities of Washington, Biden learned that loyalty and power, even when you are president and the presumptive party nominee, can slip away when the political tides and those closest turn against you.
That was CBS's Major Garrett Wannabring and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. And even though the president is now not seeking a second term, he has a critical week ahead here in Washington, and yet he's still isolated at home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, battling COVID.
He is, but he is still the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world, the most influential diplomatic power in the world. We know that his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was shifted a day later, now expected to happen Tuesday here in Washington. The vice president also expected to be present for that. All the national security team has been focused on trying to deliver in the next few days a 6-week ceasefire with the release of hostages to bring 5 Americans home, more than 100 hostages entirely, and have that be a rolling end to the war. This just shows you, though, how much time Joe Biden and his team have spent trying to break through on the foreign policy front. This is so important to him and his legacy, as he is now in these, as we know, final months trying to shape it. He wants to be able to deliver on this the same way that he can stand up there and say he expanded NATO when Vladimir Putin went and invaded Ukraine. So these are key legacy-making next few weeks for him. And Wednesday, we see that joint address to Congress by the Israeli Prime Minister.
The business of the presidency continues, and now a new person to lead the Democrats' campaign and that effort underway by Kamala Harris to secure that nomination. Ahead, more on the vice president as she has just been vaulted into history. We're going to take a look at her career trajectory from California politics to the vice presidency and now the expected Democratic nominee for president.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
So when you look out there and you see all that green, what do you think?
I see money leaving America.
Pure insanity.
You're noticing mis and disinformation on your own social media.
This is the world we're taking in, and we can make impacts and try to improve it.
Is this a battle of rich versus poor?
In part it is.
Black versus white?
In part it is.
If you're not willing to protect a place like this, then what are you willing to protect?
Go for me, go for 3, 1, 2, 3,
go!
Wow. I want a strong America. I want a proud America.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Put me in the game, coach.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
The best interviews feel like it's just a conversation with a neighbor.
Hey.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask a question that is the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Here we go. Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'll see you in the morning.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera? Keep leaning out of your close-up.
CBS Mornings, your morning routine just got better.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera? Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better.
President Trump has attacked you frequently. He's called you a monster. He said you're nasty and it would be an insult to our country if you became the first female president. Do you see this as just the rough and tumble of politics, or do you view those attacks against you as racist?
Well, this is not the first time in my life I've been called names. And it was predictable, sadly.
Do you think the president is racist?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. You can look at a pattern that goes back to him questioning the identity of the first black president of the United States. You can look at Charlottesville, when there were peaceful protesters, and on the other side, neo-Nazis. And he talks about fine people on either side, calling Mexicans rapists and criminals. His first order of business was to institute a Muslim ban. It all speaks for itself.
Well, that was my 60 Minutes interview with then Senator Kamala Harris in October of 2020. She was elected to represent California in 2016 before joining then candidate Biden as his running mate. Ed Gordon, who interviewed the president this past week, now takes a closer look at Kamala Harris.
In 2003, underdog Kamala Harris won the district attorney election for the city of San Francisco.
Most important things don't come easy.
Her victory marked the start of a political career that certainly would not come easy. Kamala Devi Harris was born in 1964 in Oakland, California. Her mother, Shamala Gopalan, was from India, and her father, Donald Harris, from Jamaica.
I was raised by a mother who said many things that were life lessons for me, including don't you ever let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are.
She grew up in Berkeley, California, where her parents were both academics and activists who participated and raised their children within the civil rights movement. Harris graduated from Howard University in 1986.
I chaired the Economic Society. I was on the Howard debate team.
She then graduated from law school from the University of California, Hastings in 1989, and public service was her calling.
If you want to pass Proposition K, you're going to have the exact opposite effect.
After serving 7 years as the district attorney of San Francisco, in 2010, she was elected Attorney General for the state of California. She broke barriers as the first Black and South Asian woman to hold the position, which she did for 6 years before she stepped into national politics.
Attorney General Kamala Harris just made it official. She is running for U.S. Senate.
We know this is the first open Senate seat we've had in almost a quarter of a century.
In 2016, she ran for Senate in California, and she won.
I intend to fight for truth and transparency and trust.
And it didn't take long for her fight to be felt in Washington, D.C.
Attorney General Barr, has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone?
I wouldn't.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat that?
With her insistent inquiries and commitment to progressive policies, presidential buzz was quickly building around her, and she made it official in 2019.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
Her announcement rally in Oakland drew nearly 20,000 people, and her campaign quickly gained momentum.
And those folks don't want a wall, they want a paycheck. So let's be clear about what should be the priorities of this administration.
Harris's most notable moment came during a primary debate with Joe Biden over his opposition to federally mandated busing.
You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
But her campaign soon began to stall. Her record as a prosecutor in California at times was at odds with the direction of the party. And before long, the momentum she had was gone.
It is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude, that I am suspending our campaign today.
However, she would soon be on a new campaign.
I have no doubt that I picked the right person to join me as the next Vice President of the United States of America, and that's Senator Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris!
Just months after her own campaign fell apart, Kamala Harris was on the presidential ticket with Joe Biden.
I accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States of America.
And in November of 2020, Joe Biden was elected the 46th president.
We did it. We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
With Kamala Harris making American history as the first female Black and South Asian vice president.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all.
In her role as vice president, she initially seemed to struggle to find her footing.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
At first, she was assigned the immigration crisis. But she found her voice when Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Today in America, 1 in 3 women of reproductive age live in a state with an abortion ban. Since Roe was overturned, I have met women who have had miscarriages in toilets because they were refused care.
And she has taken the message of reproductive rights throughout the country.
We trust women. And when Congress passes a law that restores the reproductive freedoms of Roe, our President, Joe Biden, will sign it.
And as the 2024 presidential campaign began to heat up, Vice President Harris stayed the course.
When you look at current polling, the front runner for a Republican nomination is the former president, the 45th president.
We will win re-election.
We will win
re-election. There is too much at stake, and the American people know it.
Even after President Biden's debate performance against former President Donald Trump, she stood by him.
Look, Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again.
And President Biden stood by her.
Folks, I know what a black job is. It's the Vice President of the United States.
But as President Biden drops out of the race, the focus is now on Vice President Harris. Will she be able to win the nomination and make history again?
And our thanks to Ed Gordon. Another prominent Democrat has endorsed Kamala Harris, California Governor Gavin Newsom. That is significant as now a number of Democratic governors have thrown their support behind the vice president. Now joining us is Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He was Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016. Senator Kaine serves on both the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, good to see you. And I do have to ask you, you have the unique position of having been on a ticket as a vice presidential candidate with a woman, Hillary Clinton. What advice do you have for Kamala Harris?
Well, be yourself. Kamala has made us proud as a senator in her earlier political service career and as vice president. This is not the circumstance she might have wished, but her Senate colleagues, including me, we have a lot of confidence in her, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that she and a great running mate are successful in November. The nation needs it to happen, and I'm going to do everything I can in Virginia to make it happen.
The president is isolated now, battling COVID. We are expected to hear from him sometime this week. But does Vice President Harris need to get out there? She's already getting attacked by Donald Trump. What would you advise your party to do?
The vice president does need to get out there, but that's nothing new. She has been a tireless road warrior for the Biden-Harris achievements, the Biden-Harris ticket. And as your segment pointed out, particularly in the aftermath of the horrible decision of the United States Supreme Court in Dobbs that President Trump celebrates and continue to celebrate, she's really come into the spotlight and done a great job of advancing the notion that American women should be able to make their own reproductive choices. So she'll be out there. And then we have to offer an amazing thank you to Joe Biden. I've been saying for weeks in Virginia that Joe Biden can always be counted on to do the patriotic thing. This is in the mode of George Washington or Teddy Roosevelt being able to run again, but recognizing that the needs of the nation made it better that he passed the torch to a new generation of leadership. Donald Trump's yesterday's news. Kamala Harris is today's and tomorrow's news, and we're going to do all we can to make sure she succeeds.
How will the vice president prosecute the case against Donald Trump?
It's interesting you mentioned that. Donald Trump has been convicted of a number of crimes and been convicted, including of crimes of sexual assault. And in Kamala Harris, you have a prosecutor who has prosecuted the perpetrators of sexual crimes, and she is a great prosecutor. And I think she's going to, make the case for the wonderful Biden-Harris record low unemployment, record low insurance rate, stock market up, manufacturing up, infrastructure up, linking arms with allies around the globe, battling to protect reproductive freedom. She is going to make the case that the path we've been on has been the right path, and the last thing we should do is hand the government back to a guy who tried to topple the peaceful transfer of power by inspiring a violent attack on the Capitol in January of 2021.
Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, who ran alongside Hillary Clinton in 2016. Senator, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Ahead, how did we get to this unprecedented moment in American history? And what happens next? We'll be right back.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Ready, set, go!
All right. Okay, let's go.
Let's just start at the beginning.
The clock, it's ticking.
Did they prevent justice?
You're not answering my question.
They lied? What is at stake?
That's a great question.
Great question.
What kind of needs are you sensing here?
You want to start in alphabetical order or numerical?
You don't want to talk
Okay,
about
fine,
what I do.
fine.
I mean,
Never mind. I don't care. Wow, this is really, really hot. How fast do you think you would go?
You think that Mr. Putin's responsible?
I'm sure that he's responsible.
Are you safe here?
Are you ready for some tough questions?
It's the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years.
I view it as a significant challenge.
Why won't you say the word crisis?
Whoa! See it? It's right here.
What's the likelihood you and I have been hacked by China?
110%.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
This generation of robots is going to be different. That's a hell of a way to get into a country.
It seems unbelievable.
This is mind-blowing.
Breathtaking.
It's time for the new season of the CBS News original.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
So when you look out there and you see all that green, what do you think?
I see money leaving America.
Pure insanity.
You're noticing mis and disinformation on your own social media.
This is the world we're taking in, and we can make impacts and try to improve it.
Is this a battle of rich versus poor?
In part it is.
Black versus white?
In part it is.
If you're not willing to protect a place like this, then what are you willing to protect?
Go for me, go for 3, 1, 2, 3,
Go!
Wow. I want a strong America. I want a proud America.
It's been a whirlwind several weeks after a disastrous debate performance and the assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump. 60 Minutes correspondent Cecilia Vega now with a closer look at how we got to this historic moment.
The 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden.
The Biden campaign hoped that a summer debate would reignite doubt among undecided voters about former President Donald Trump and his fitness for office. Instead, many of the 50 million viewers were given reason to wonder about President Biden.
Eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID,
The split screen may have been just as damaging as what President Biden had to say. He looked pale and at times lost.
Hello.
The next day, Mr. Biden tried to repair the damage.
That's okay.
This was Raleigh, North Carolina on June 28th. The president blamed a cold for his debate performance.
But I spent 90 minutes on the stage debating a guy who has the morals of an alley cat.
The first crack in support came from Congressman Lloyd Doggett, a Texas Democrat in a swing district who publicly urged President Biden to drop out of the race. The president dismissed concerns about his mental acuity and age in an ABC News interview.
If you can be convinced that you cannot defeat Donald Trump, will you stand down?
Well, it depends if the Lord Almighty comes out and tells me that, I might do that.
The next message did not come from heaven, but it did come from a star. Actor George Clooney, who had helped raise $30 million for the president, wrote an opinion letter to the New York Times saying, "We are not going to win in November with this president." A summit of NATO leaders on July 11th in Washington was supposed to offer the opportunity for President Biden to show his mettle. But with every word now under scrutiny, it was hard to miss him mixing up names of an ally with an adversary.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
And then this, hours later at a press conference.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
By this point, nearly a dozen Democrats in the House and one in the Senate had called for the president to drop out of the race. But a crowd in Detroit on July 12th had this message. "Don't you quit," they chanted. The president's future as his party's nominee was now the story of the moment.
Hello, Butler, and hello.
Until 6:11 p.m. on July 13th. The failed assassination attempt of the former president. This clenched fist contrasted with President Biden losing grip of his own party. Longtime friends, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, spoke with Mr. Biden privately.
I want to speak to you tonight about the need for us to lower the temperature in our politics.
President Biden's Oval Office address the following night was intended to be reassuring in the wake of political violence. He defended his decision to stay in the race in this NBC interview on July 15th.
Who do you listen to on deeply personal issues like the decisions whether to stay in the race or not?
Me.
And he did it again the next day at the NAACP National Convention in Las Vegas.
And I am all in. So let me ask you, are you all in? Because I'm all in.
The momentum on the Hill, however, was going in the opposite direction, with more Democratic members of Congress publicly asking the president to exit the race. President Biden spoke with Ed Gordon of BET.
Is there anything that you would look to, you personally, not anybody else, not other pundits, not even perhaps family members, that you would look to say, if I see that, I will reevaluate?
If there has some medical condition that emerged, if the doctors came to me and said, you got this problem, that problem.
Health did become an issue for the president on July 17th, just hours after meeting voters. He was diagnosed with COVID and went to his beach home in Delaware to isolate. By now, more than 30 Democrats in Congress had gone public. Equally bad for the incumbent, the growing number of political donors freezing millions of dollars in contributions. Still, the president promised to get back on the campaign trail this week. But this afternoon, President Biden quit the race and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to lead the ticket. Bill Whitaker spoke to her last year for 60 Minutes.
We were talking to some Democratic donors, and they have told us that should something befall President Biden and he is not able to run, that there would be a free-for-all for who would run as president. You are in the spot that would be a natural for you to step up, but we're hearing from donors that that's not a natural spot, that they would not naturally fall into line. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to engage in that hypothetical because Joe Biden is very much alive and running for re-election. So
but you do know, I mean, that is a concern and a legitimate concern, I would say.
I hear from a lot of different people a lot of different things, but let me just tell you, I'm focused on the job. I truly am, and doing this job for the American people. Our democracy is on the line, Bill. And I frankly, in my head, do not have time for parlor games.
And this evening, Vice President Harris posted this image on social media and said in a statement she intends to win the nomination and, quote, defeat Donald Trump. Cecilia Vega, CBS News, New York.
No sitting American president has dropped out of the race so late in the cycle. I want to talk about that with everyone here. Robert Costa, this was a difficult decision for the president to make.
In the frenzy of politics tonight, it's also important to remember how much of a heart-wrenching decision this was for President Biden. Speaking to sources close to his family, some of his longtime associates, he has been at Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, at his beach home all weekend, often alone because he is recovering from COVID, coughing as he makes phone calls and speaks with his aides. He never wanted to get out until even late last night. He was telling his closest friends, I can beat Trump. I can do this. But he saw the writing on the wall politically, all of the pressure. And he was at this place that has been a retreat for him, as Senator Coons told you earlier today, Rehoboth Beach. It's where he's gone for the past 50 years after personal tragedy, political humiliation. It's always back to Delaware. And that's where he is tonight. The most momentous decision he has ever made in a long and storied political career. He did it relatively alone with his family and his closest aides at the beach, thinking about history, his legacy, and the future of the Democratic Party.
Robert Costa, thank you. Scott McFarland, we have heard from Democrats tonight saying that Kamala Harris is the perfect person as a former prosecutor to lay out for the American people the case against Donald Trump. Where does that stand?
Yeah, he's going back to court. This wild campaign is taking us right back to the courthouse. Listen to what's coming up in just the next few weeks. September 18th, potentially sentencing for Donald Trump in Manhattan for those dozens of felonies he was convicted of. August, early August, that federal criminal election conspiracy case goes back to the court in Washington, D.C. Could hear some new evidence from Jack Smith. And all the while, Jack Smith's going to try to resuscitate that classified documents case, which was dismissed on Monday.
So much still ahead. Margaret Brennan, what's next for Kamala Harris? If she becomes the Democratic nominee, this will be historic as the first woman of color at the top of any presidential ticket. But she's got a way to go before she gets that nomination.
She does. And, you know, I've traveled with the vice president. I've interviewed her a number of times. One of the criticisms of her is that she's not a typical retail politician. She's a prosecutor. If you give her a mission, she can deliver, and she can deliver that message in a strong way. It's not the glad handing that you see there. And as a California politician, didn't necessarily have to reach across the aisle very often. Those things are going to come up. You're going to hear criticisms of her. You will hear about her portfolio. She has been frustrated that her job was to solve the root causes of migration. In other words, persuade people not to travel to the United States. Her job wasn't securing the U.S. border. That's going to be an attack line, trying to package it as that. She's been charged by President Biden to do things like build alliances in Asia. I traveled with her to Indonesia, where she was doing that. She's spent a lot of time on some of these foreign policy issues, certainly just alliance maintenance. We'll probably hear more from her in a way that characterizes her as that strong commander-in-chief. That's something she will have to persuade male voters of as well.
And what both sides agree is the most important presidential election in a generation. Thanks to all of you for our coverage all day long here on CBS. And what an end to this historic day. President Joe Biden announcing today that for the good of his party and the good of American democracy, he is not seeking re-election to the presidency. The 81-year-old endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris, and now a number of governors and lawmakers are endorsing her as well. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and for some of you tonight on the CBS Evening News. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington. Good night.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay Reiser at the CBS Broadcast Center, and we are continuing to follow breaking news that President Joe Biden is stepping down from the 2024 race for the White House. He made the announcement on social media just before 2 p.m. Eastern Sunday. In a statement, he said, quote, "While it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down." The president says he plans to address the nation later this week to explain his decision in more detail. He is currently isolating in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, recovering from COVID. In a separate post on social media, President Biden endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. He said his first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Harris as VP, and he described it as the best decision he's made. He also called on his fellow Democrats to, quote, "come together and beat Trump." Reaction from Democratic lawmakers has been pouring in. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a statement, quote, "Joe Biden has not only been a great president and a great legislative leader, but he is a truly amazing human being." He went on to say Biden once again put his country, party, and future first. Biden's former boss, former President Barack Obama, also expressed his gratitude Sunday. In a statement, Obama said Biden has been, quote, "one of America's most consequential presidents." He also said he knows Biden wouldn't make the decision to step aside unless he believed it was right for the country. Former president and official Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump also responded to Biden's announcement. On Truth Social, Trump said Joe Biden is not fit to run and not fit to serve. In a phone conversation with CBS News, Trump said it's good for the country that Biden is stepping aside, but said he thinks Kamala Harris is no better than him. We have team coverage of this political shakeup. Willie James Inman is at Biden's Delaware home. Nancy Cordes is at the White House. Nicole Killian is on Capitol Hill. But we start with John Dickerson here in Studio 57. John is a CBS News senior political analyst. He's also the anchor of the Daily Report with John Dickerson here on CBS News 24/7. Help put this into historical context for us. Is this the day we're all going to remember where we were?
I think that's true, in part because presidents don't give up power willingly. And also, there's never been a president who has dropped out this late in the race. And that's not just a date on the calendar. President Biden has the nomination essentially locked up. When LBJ dropped out in 1968, he didn't. What that means is the Democratic Party was really far down the track. And that means there's just extra amounts of complexity. So this is a shocking earthquake, but the reverberations and aftershocks are still going to be felt for a while.
What do you portend for the future of the Democratic Party? The RNC, Republicans are kind of leaving the RNC with the wind at their sails. They've sort of touted this unity message, which you, of course, have covered as well, and that unity is not just saying we all have to be unified for Trump. But do you see the Democratic Party coalescing behind Harris, or do you see a fight?
The clock is ticking. The minute Joe Biden announced that he wasn't going to be running, a unity pressure started on the Democratic Party. But there's a countervailing pressure, which is those people who wanted Joe Biden to stay in the race and who feel like the elites, the party powerful, the media shoved him out of the race. They have sensitive feelings which need to be tended to. So how do you push to unity fast without pushing so fast that you end up bruising feelings even further? And that's important because you need the party to get to the place of unity that the Republican Party is, so that then they can prosecute the case and try and win over the persuadable voters if they're out there. So the clock is ticking. How long it will take, we'll see. The move to Harris has been pretty fast. We'll see over the next couple of days.
Jamie Harrison saying he was still emotional over the decision. Ron Klain, Biden's former chief of staff, sort of had that slight bitterness and tone in his statement. Now, how will this work in the future in terms of Biden's war chest, in terms of the campaign switching? We know that campaign workers were told you still have a job tomorrow.
It is much easier if it goes to Harris. If it is not going to go to Harris, a process has to be put in place to, a process may have to be put in place no matter what, so that Harris can earn the nomination. What exactly that means is left to be determined. As a candidate, you want to earn it because you want people to be invested in you. And so there's a reason that Harris used the word earn the minute she responded to this news. But it's easier for Harris because her name is on the ticket with Biden to get the money. So that's a very, very important part of her her candidacy and why there's been this support behind her for it. And another candidate would have to, first of all, arrive. We haven't, in all these conversations that have been taking place since this news came out, nobody has said, well, it could be X. There is no X at the moment.
Democrats like to say they have a deep bench.
Well, they might, but the clock is ticking. And that bench somebody has to emerge as an alternative because they've got to get lawmakers behind them. They got to get voters behind them. They've got to move. And the fact that one has not emerged yet gives you a sense of how difficult it would be for someone to emerge.
And it would also be a good look for Harris or whoever the nominee is to earn that, because Republicans are going to seize on that and call it, as many have, a coronation.
Sure, they will call it a coronation. I think at the end of the day, if the Democrats will prosecute a message, and Republicans will say what they're going to say about a coronation, and if the Democrats are successful, nobody will care really, because they will have been successful in prosecuting the case for why they deserve power and why Donald Trump doesn't. If the coronation criticism works with Democrats, it will work because they basically can't make an alternative case. They can't speak to those larger issues. So if the presidency is determined on like the internal rules of the Democratic Party, then the Democrats have failed to make a larger claim for the public. So they're doomed if it becomes about the internal workings of the Democratic Party.
What about some of the far-right voices saying if he's not fit to run, he's not fit to serve? Is that going to go anywhere?
Well, it'll stick the White House. It'll bedevil the Democratic campaign because it's twinned with a second point, which is, wait a minute, what did you know and when did you know it about whether President Biden was fit to serve? Democrats will say the point was that he can't go for another 4 years, and so now is the time to take on Donald Trump and give, and I imagine some of them will start to say, so that people can make their choice about Kamala Harris, who will be the next president. So give them that opportunity to actually make the choice, not just be handed off to her in a second term. But I think that Republicans will pin the Democrats down on that, and Democrats are going to have to come up with a good answer.
John Dickerson, thank you. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is outside the president's home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Good to see you. What can you tell us about what's been happening behind the scenes and what discussions led up to this bombshell announcement today?
Hey there, Lindsay. Good to be with you. Well, President Biden, as you mentioned, is here at his beach home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, and he has been recovering from COVID out of public view since last Wednesday evening. And it was late last night that we learned, according to a source familiar, that President Biden started to come to this decision. He huddled with his advisors, and today he made those important phone calls, not only to his campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, but he also called the vice president and his chief of staff as well before he made this decision. That decision went out, as you noted, just before 2 p.m. And it was shortly after that, about 30 minutes or so, where we saw the president endorse the vice president to be the next nominee for the Democratic Party. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of conversations that were going on behind the scenes. I'll also note that not only was the president making phone calls today to essentially talk about this decision, the vice president was making phone calls as well, working the phones, trying to gather up support for her nomination to be the next president of the United States if she were to be successful this November. But still, this is just sending political shockwaves, as you and John were just talking about, across the nation, with the president bowing out of the race, bowing to that pressure that we've been seeing grow, with more than 3 dozen Democrats coming out and saying that the president should step aside. Lindsay.
Willie Inman in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Thank you.
Joe Biden is grounded. He's grounded in his faith, in his family, and in our state. Excuse me. I'm sorry. This was a very difficult decision, and one that I think reflects the very best of who Joe Biden is. Someone who, as you put it, Bob, comes home because it's where his strength is. His strength is in his family. His strength is in our community. His strength is in his faith.
That was Democratic Senator Chris Coons getting emotional earlier on CBS News and reacting to news that President Biden was stepping down for the 2024 election and endorsing as Vice President Kamala Harris. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us from the White House. Nancy, what has been the reaction so far to Biden's endorsement of Harris?
Well, among Democrats, there has been an outpouring of gratitude to the president for A, coming to this decision, and B, for having what they view as a very successful first term as president. They acknowledge that this was not an easy decision for him, nor would it be for anyone. We've seen an equal magnitude of support for the vice president, Kamala Harris, as the presumptive nominee. In fact, almost everyone in Congress who was calling on President Biden to step aside has now come out in support of Vice President Harris. And so she is full steam ahead, Lindsay. In fact, just a few moments ago, the first fundraising text from Vice President Harris as the presumptive nominee went out. She said, "I'm running to be president of the United States. I'm honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination." She says she's going to hit the campaign trail in the coming days, et cetera, et cetera. "Will you pitch in your first $20 today to elect me as president of the United States and defeat Donald Trump?" So there you have it. Within just a few hours, she is now taking on the mantle of presumptive nominee, even as we are starting to get our first indication that there is at least one person who might try to challenge her for that nomination. That is the independent senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin. He was, of course, a Democrat. He's now an independent. We're told he may be considering returning to the Democratic Party so that he could mount a challenge for the nomination. We'll see if that comes to fruition or not.
So that said, who would be some VP contenders that are part of the conversation right now on a Harris ticket?
Well, you hear the most talk about governors from battleground states, and there are several of them to choose from. There is Roy Cooper. He is the governor of North Carolina. There's Josh Shapiro. He is the governor of Pennsylvania. We know that both President Biden and Vice President Harris spoke to Shapiro today about the decision. Then there's Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. And then another name you hear a lot is Senator Mark Kelly, who's from another battleground state, Arizona. So those are some names you hear bandied about, but it's certainly not limited to those names. We've also heard talk of Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. It's a long list of about 10 different names that gets discussed. And Vice President Harris now has only a few weeks to make a decision before the Democratic convention comes up in August.
From the White House, thank you. Reactions have been pouring in from Capitol Hill. Before Biden made that decision, there were more than 36 Democratic lawmakers calling for him to step aside. Several senators who are facing tough re-election campaigns in their home states, like John Tester and Sherrod Brown, joined those calls in recent days. The chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Susan Delbene of Washington, praised the president's decision to exit the race, calling him, quote, the most consequential president in modern history. She added his legacy will be one of principled leadership with a focus on families and communities. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a statement, quote, Joe Biden has not only been a great president and a great legislative leader, but he is a truly amazing human being. He went on to say Biden once again put his country, party, and future first. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, quote, President Biden is one of the most accomplished and consequential leaders in American history. America is a better place today because President Joe Biden has led us with intellect, grace, and dignity. In contrast, Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York said, quote, if Joe Biden can't run for re-election, he is unable and unfit to serve as president of the United States. He must immediately resign. Let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. So, Nicole, what other notable congressional reaction are you following?
Well, I think you summarized most of it. I mean, look, one thing I would point out is that in terms of some of the congressional leaders that we have heard from, while much of their statements have been in praise of the president, they have not necessarily endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, whereas we have seen more rank-and-file members do the same. I would also note that in terms of congressional Republicans, as you pointed out with Congresswoman Stefanik or GOP Conference Chair Stefanik's statement, there are a number of congressional Republicans who believe that the president should resign. That being said, there are other more sympathetic Republicans like Mitt Romney who praised the work of the president and said that he felt that he made the right decision, but didn't go as far as some of his Republican colleagues. One thing I would also note is that we know that the vice president has really been working the phones for the better part of the day, reaching out and speaking with a number of congressional members and leaders, everyone from Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries to the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and other chairs of what is called the Tri-Caucus, the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, as well as Judy Chu, who heads CAPAC, which is the Organization for Asian American Lawmakers. In addition to that, we know that the vice president has also spoken with the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, as well as the chair of the New Democrat Coalition, which makes up a broad swath of Democratic members in the House, Congresswoman Annie Kuster. So she has been, really trying to shore up support among members, many of whom who have already come out in support, endorsing the vice president, but certainly understanding that she may have more work to do to fully shore up that support from congressional Democrats as she seeks to become the nominee.
That said, Nancy had mentioned the name Joe Manchin. What are you learning from sources about the appetite of coalescing behind Harris versus an open primary?
Well, I think, that is something that remains to be seen. There have certainly been some calls for an open primary or a mini primary of sorts. But I can tell you, having just gotten off of a call with organizers unrelated to the Hill, I would note that, and this is a key constituency group in support of the Biden-Harris administration agenda, the point was also made that this really is a time to try to unite, that there is not a whole lot of time to move forward in the sense of, names have to be printed on ballots, and also understanding that it's important to try to elevate someone to the nominee position as soon as possible, again, so that the party can move forward.
Nicole Killian, thank you. Let's bring in CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Margaret Brennan. She's also moderator of Face the Nation. And Margaret, you spoke with Senator Manchin this morning. He said, "Don't look at me, nothing to see here. How much can change?" What are your sources telling you about his current mindset and what would have to happen for him to throw his name in?
Well, independent Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, remember, he just recently left the Democratic Party. He's been harshly critical of it, saying that it has lost touch with working class Americans in particular. He was making the case on Face the Nation that he thinks this is a problem. At the time, he was talking about Joe Biden stepping aside. When I asked him, would he support Kamala Harris, he said, not unless there was a change in platform. And when I said, well, what about you? Would you be interested in running as vice president or running at all? And he said, don't look at me, time for a new generation. Well, you're right. A lot changed from about 10:40 this morning until this evening when we did see President Joe Biden say he was not running for re-election and then automatically endorsed his vice president. And that endorsement has rubbed some Democrats the wrong way, who want to see more of a competition rather than, as one said to me, a coronation of Kamala Harris. And there is frustration at that. So I would put Joe Manchin in that category in now saying he wants to reevaluate. What we have been told, myself and a number of our CBS correspondents, is that Joe Manchin is receiving calls from donors interested in somebody who is more of the sort of old centrist Democrat, though he left the party. First thing on the to-do list would be to rejoin the Democratic Party if he actually wanted to throw his hat in the ring. But there are real questions about process here. And frankly, whether or not he ends up actually running, this is a mechanism by which to force a conversation within the party about what does a winning ticket look like. can a winning ticket have Vice President Kamala Harris at the top of it? And on Face the Nation earlier, it was Joe Manchin who said, look at the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, look at the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, as candidates he thought had shown they could work across the aisle because they are Democratic governors in states that have to deal with Republican legislatures. That really seems to be the rub here, the ability to work across the aisle. That's going to be one of the criticisms of Vice President Harris is does she have that record of being able to work across the aisle, or will she just fit in the mold of a progressive California Democrat? That is why this conversation was generated in the past few hours.
Margaret, I know you're also tracking international reaction from world leaders. What have been some of the responses that have stood out to you?
Well, from around the world, we have seen statements issued by prime ministers from the United Kingdom to Russia. Russia notably jumping on the disinformation campaign and repeating what sound an awful lot like some of the criticisms we've heard from Republicans in this country, which is to claim that there was a conspiracy here to cover up the true nature of Joe Biden's mental state and to say that journalists were part of some great conspiracy. That's the talking point out of the Kremlin overnight. And you have seen that amplified. So this is a question, frankly, that Democrats will have to answer for. It's exactly when was it persuasive that you needed to come to this extreme measure of 4 months out from an election, switching out the top of the ticket? Was it just June 27th and that debate, a debate that Democrats asked to have because they wanted to inject some energy into the conversation by showing that the president could be quick on his feet and sharp on the issues, something that backfired and then just over the past 3 weeks has led to this very painful process for Joe Biden himself and for Democrats who are openly in disarray about this. At least this Sunday, we have a conclusion to the question of whether Joe Biden could stay in the race or not. We still don't know just how competitive Kamala Harris will be at the top of the ticket. We know coming into this weekend, the CBS polling had shown that she was about behind 3 points in a hypothetical head-to-head with Donald Trump. But that is something that world leaders will continue to watch. And we know, even just this week, one world leader, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, expected here Tuesday, will meet with President Biden and Vice President Harris. He'll speak to Congress, and there are open questions of will he go and meet with Donald Trump? You are seeing world leaders try to hedge their bets here, build relationships with what could be an incoming administration, and openly wondering, what does that mean for the world?
Margaret Brennan, thank you. Let's turn now to Ashley Etienne. Ashley is a former communications director for Vice President Harris and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She's also a CBS News political contributor. Ashley, you just heard Margaret describe this process as painful. What is your reaction and how do you feel the party moves forward?
You know, honestly, I'm thinking a lot of this is a whole bunch of hype within Washington. You know, no disrespect to Joe Manchin, but, you know, I've worked for 2 White Houses and the Speaker, and I can tell you with full confidence he has no base within the Democratic Party. He only has sway with the reporters here in Washington. So I don't think this is going to be an issue. I think the Vice President has proven herself. The President doesn't do that job alone. She is a governing partner with him. I was in those rooms with the Vice President, the President. She sat in the PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefing with the President every morning, calling those world leaders. The record that Democrats are running on, from landmark legislation on health care, climate, as well as infrastructure, she got that done with the President. Who do you think was on the Hill convincing members and working across the aisle to get that done? She was doing that. So for the party to try to walk away from her at this point would be malpractice. And I'm not hearing that within the caucus. I've been hearing for the last week and almost a half that even the frontliners, who are the most vulnerable members within the Democratic Party, have been willing to back Kamala Harris. They just needed some certainty from the president. They wanted to give him some space to actually make this decision. So I don't think the party is in total chaos. I think there's some party elites and a minority within the party that's actually pushing this issue in Washington, and it seems to be consuming us. But I don't think it's a larger problem within the party.
Do you feel that Harris has ground to make up? We are 107 days out.
I don't think so at all. She's been, according to her team, she's hit 20 states, 60 communities already this year. If you believe the polling, she's outperforming even Biden among that key constituency, that broad coalition that he built in 2020 to win. She's doing incredibly well in the Biden internal polls among independent women, among those suburban women. So I think this is going to be a competitive race. She's now going to have some space to demonstrate not only her skills, but her smarts and her ability to drive and build this big coalition and drive them out to the polls. Here's what I do think. I think two things. She's got two things that are working for her in her advantage that people, I think, are discounting right now. That's her gender. Never, I think, before has there been a more ideal environment for a woman to win the White House. And she's also has her race. She's got the base of the Democratic Party are black people. And so they're going to fall behind her and support her and lift her up as they did Barack Obama. So I think those two things are running to her advantage. And so it's going to be an interesting competitive race.
Ashley Etienne, thank you.
Thank you.
Republican voters and lawmakers are also reacting to President Biden's decision to step down from the race. GOP presidential nominee Donald Trump shared his thoughts on social media platform Truth Social, saying Biden was, quote, not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve. Danielle Alvarez joins us now. She's a senior advisor for the Trump campaign. Danielle, I want to ask you your reaction to today's news, and also, the former president went into the RNC, of course, after the horrific attempt on his life. His message was unity. Do you think that his statements and Truth Social posts today are supporting that unity message?
I think it's a stark contrast what's going on with the Republican Party and President Trump and what's going on with the Harris-Biden ticket and the absolute disarray on the left. I mean, the hope is that Kamala Harris will become the nominee and at the top of the ticket, but she owns everything of the Biden administration. Let's remember she was the original border czar. Let's remember she was the deciding vote on the $1.9 trillion spending bill that sent us off into inflation. She wanted to abolish ICE. She wanted to decriminalize border crossings. I mean, she is the absolute disaster and California elite and California liberal.
Well, I think she was in charge of discovering the root causes behind some of the migration. And we do need to point out that June we did see a 3-year low for illegal border crossings. I want to ask you, Danielle, about polling.
Well, that's just not what any American is feeling.
Well, okay, that may be some of the research that you're getting, but we do know that Harris and Trump are relatively within a few points of one another when it comes to polling. Is your campaign concerned about that?
We have been prepared for Kamala Harris or any sort of switch in the ticket since President Trump delivered his dominant debate performance weeks ago. In fact, we had launched an ad against Kamala in battleground states the week of the debate because, again, she owns every failure that is Joe Biden's. And so we're not going to take anything for granted, but we feel confident our best asset is President Trump and his record of success, his record of prosperity, his record of strength. So we can either make America great again or we can make America like California.
Danielle, will Trump commit to debating the Democratic nominee?
He has said he would, but let's wait to see who's at the top of the ticket. I mean, that's a hypothetical question that until the party in
debates
power
are a normal part of the process, so the commitment is not there?
He has said he would, but the Democrats have not decided who is at the top of their ticket. Right now, the Democrat voters have not chosen Kamala Harris. They changed the primary process for Joe Biden. They've spent $200 million. They have spent $200 million supporting him, and now he has stepped aside, and they're trying to put the crown on her. But that is party elites. And so Democrat voters and the DNC will come, and they will have a very difficult decision to make.
Senior Trump campaign advisor Danielle Alvarez, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Our Caitlin Huey-Burns spent the last few days covering the RNC in Milwaukee. She joins us next with details on a GOP potential game plan. You just heard some of it there. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I use sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Vice President Kamala Harris appears to be the frontrunner to become the Democratic presidential nominee. And now the GOP has to adjust its campaign strategy as it faces a new opponent. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us from our D.C. bureau. Caitlin, I just want to get your reaction. We had Danielle Alvarez, Trump campaign spokesperson or advisor rather, in the beginning of the show. And you could start to see some of the strategy taking shape, really attaching Harris to border policy, trying to paint her as an extremist.
Yeah, Lindsay, great to be with you. As you know, I was talking to you last night from the Trump campaign rally in Michigan. And at the time, we were asking campaign advisors, whether their strategy would change if Biden was replaced at the top of the ticket. And they were telling us that they believe that everything in terms of Biden's agenda will transfer on to Harris. They've been calling her today an enabler in chief and criticizing her for covering up, in their words, questions about Biden's mental acuity. But there's no doubt that Biden was the one they wanted to run against. They built an entire campaign focused on Biden, his mental acuity and fitness for office, his policies, particularly on the border and immigration and the economy. Now they have to shift strategy, and it is unclear, as you heard Danielle mention, who they may be not only running against at the top of the ticket, although it looks like people are coalescing around Harris, but also who the running mate might be, and that raises some stakes for J.D. Vance.
Do you get a sense that Republicans will launch a fight to keep Biden in the race, if there are even mechanisms in place for that to happen, because they viewed him as, in their eyes, beatable?
Well, it was interesting because you saw the social media post from Donald Trump today saying now we have to start all over, essentially, and was asking for a refund because of all the money that they've spent against Biden. That's not realistic at this point. Of course, it's up to Democrats. Joe Biden was the one who had to decide whether to stay in, and he has decided, of course, to step out. Republicans now have to figure out, how to wage a campaign against this ticket. So, I've been talking to Republicans today, and they think that this just transfers over to Harris, that they can use everything they were going after Biden to go after Harris. But there's a big vulnerability now that is kind of removed from that ticket, and that's the age question. And that's an enthusiasm question, perhaps. That's what remains to be seen is, will this selection of Harris, if it does indeed turn out to be her, does that galvanize a depleted Democratic base? That was something that Republicans had been sort of banking on. When I talked to an advisor to the campaign last night, they said even if Harris, galvanizes the base and especially black voters, that the Trump campaign could turn out their base. They have a proven ability to do so, and also could turn out white voters at higher margins. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. Now they have this, big task of also defining a potential vice presidential pick who may not be kind of nationally defined.
Does the age question now jump to the other ticket?
It's interesting because they are, Trump and Biden are around the same age, but throughout all of this, Trump has been making the case to his supporters that this is not about age, it's about competence. He repeats that line over and over again. And when you talk to Trump supporters, and, I've asked them about the age question for Trump, they have no qualms about it. But it was interesting to note, of course, that they selected J.D. Vance as a generational contrast. That's a contrast not, designed to be a contrast to Biden, but it's also a contrast to the top of the ticket. So, that was the age question for Biden was kind of hovering over this entire campaign. And the RNC had been quite successful in elevating videos of any time Biden stumbled or, was, just appeared to be weakened, that those videos kind of went viral there. So again, this campaign built around campaigning against something else, and now with just 3 or so months to go, they have to shift strategy. But they've also maintained that their strategy remains in the Midwest, and that's also going to be a question if Kamala Harris can pull those voters.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you.
But even Democrats are worried about the president's age. The Wall Street Journal had a poll showing 2/3 of Democrats say Joe Biden is too old to run again. Are you prepared to be commander-in-chief?
Yes, I am, if necessary. But Joe Biden is going to be fine. And let me tell you something. I work with Joe Biden every day. Under Joe Biden's leadership, we have transformed and are in the process of transforming America's infrastructure with an historic investment in not only roads and bridges, but high-speed internet, what we are doing around issues like lead pipes, and I could go on and on.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris on Face the Nation back in September of 2023. And as we look forward, I want to bring in Chuck Rocha. He joins us now. Chuck is a former senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign and a Democratic strategist. Chuck, how should Democrats get behind Harris as the presidential nominee?
We've been looking and we've been living through all kinds of nightmarish things as a consultant. And what I mean by that as a Democratic consultant is we've been fighting each other over should he stay in, should he not stay in after the debate. And anytime we're talking about ourselves and not the opponent, we are losing. Well, today, the Democratic Party got a shot of energy. You can see it in the fundraising numbers. You can see it with the folks that are jumping to fall in line. And I think this is exactly what you need to be doing if you're going to have any chance to beat Donald Trump. So I'm excited about what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing my party come together.
What about Wildcard Mansion?
Oh, I think that he likes to see his name in the press, and I think that he is used to being the center of attention, but he's going to quickly learn. I've been to every single Democratic convention since 1996 when I was the youngest delegate from the state of Texas. Democratic delegates are yellow dog Democrats, and they ain't going to have no time for somebody who registered as an independent.
Okay, let's talk about the DNC. We are, believe it or not, 1 month away. How do you see preparations changing behind the scenes right now?
Well, first of all, they're having to reprint a lot of signs and a lot of T-shirts and a lot of buttons. That's the first thing they're doing.
The ticket officially.
That's right. So they've taken all those Biden signs and stuff and said, all right, there's going to be a discount down at the corner store. But anyway, I'm being serious, but also not serious, because we need to have a nominee and a ticket so we can have a logo. As a guy that designs mail and makes TV commercials, this is something really important, because as you saw with the Republican convention, branding means something. Yep. So yeah, sure, it matters who is picked, and is it somebody from Pennsylvania or somebody from North Carolina like you've been talking about, but the branding matters, because we're going to have a lot of excitement around this convention. So that's the first thing, just the nuance. And then it's all the committees, it's changing what the delegates will be doing. These delegate breakfasts that happen every morning now will have a lot more impact than they would have in the years past.
Chuck, we know that we have seen fracturing in the Republican Party over the last several years, but this past week in the RNC, we did see people fall in line. We saw Nikki Haley speak at the RNC. We saw people wear white bandages on their ears as a show of solidarity for Trump. How do you compete with the momentum that they have right now?
It's just a contrast, and I tell this to all my candidates, you can't get worried about things you can't control. But the things you can control is drawing a stark contrast between Donald Trump and now Vice President Harris on what they've accomplished, and a reason to rehire Ms. Harris for the next 4 years and make sure that folks remember what it was like when Donald Trump's in office. You stay focused on what you've done. Democrats need to get tough, and they need to get proud. We need to be proud of what we've done, proud of what Joe Biden has accomplished, and then tell the American voters what we have planned for them over the next 4 years and how that contrasts with a dangerous man like Donald Trump. That's how you get past it, is contrast and being very, very proud of what you've done.
Chuck Rocha, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
One of the Democratic lawmakers who called for President Biden to drop out joins us next. What he is now saying that since the president has ended his bid, and his thoughts on Vice President Harris's chances. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, Half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Democratic lawmakers had been increasing their calls for Biden to drop out of the race since his debate with former President Trump more than 3 weeks ago. And one of those congressmen was Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. He says he realized Biden shouldn't run when they were together in Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And joining us now is Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Good to see you, Lindsay.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question. The debate was June 27th. The anniversary of D-Day was June 6th. Why did you not say something sooner?
Well, because I don't think you characterized it correctly exactly. I mean, I saw this decline over time, and I was very concerned about the president when I saw him in Normandy. And that, for me, made the debate really the nail in the coffin. And one of the things that changed is a lot of people have said for a long time that Vice President Harris, wouldn't be as good as President Biden. I don't think that's true. I think Vice President Harris can absolutely prosecute the case against Donald Trump and can do it in a way that can ensure that Democrats win the election.
I want to ask you about moving forward, but first, do you think there need to be hard, honest questions within the party, within the people that surrounded the president about how things got so far?
Look, there'll be a time and a place for that, but that is absolutely not what we should be focused on right now. We should be focused on presenting a dramatically different vision for the future of America than the dark vision presented and painted by Donald Trump. You saw the Republican Party just fall in line behind Trump, Project 2025, his extremist pick for a vice president, and a real dark future for Americans whose rights he wants to take away. So you're going to see a dramatic contrast between that and the vision for the future, the opportunities for every American that the Vice President Harris will present. That's what we need to focus on right now, because an election that could determine the fate of our democracy is just a few months away.
Do you think Democrats can do that now that Biden has stepped aside?
Oh, absolutely. This is a great day for the party. It's a great day for Vice President Harris. And it's also a great day for President Biden. I mean, what a statesman. Someone who not only wielded tremendous power over decades in the White House and the Senate, but had the courage to give it up, following in the footsteps of great leaders like George Washington, someone who's remembered in part for his willingness to give up power. This will be a fantastic day for the legacy of President Biden, and it shows that the Democratic Party is actually willing to respond to the concerns of Americans. Remember, 3 out of 5 Americans said they didn't want to vote for either Biden or Trump. They didn't want either to be the nominee. One party just fell in line behind one of those guys. Another party, the Democratic Party, is saying, we hear you, America. We're going to give you a new choice.
Will you endorse Vice President Harris?
I already have. I endorsed her hours ago. I think she's ready for the job. She's been in training in the White House. She has the experience and the resources. She's going to tap right into all the resources that President Biden has already accumulated for his campaign.
Who would you like to see on the ticket with her?
Oh, I don't know. Too early to tell for that. And of course, that's the vice president's decision. But the good news is there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent out there in the Democratic Party. And she's got a great problem to pick her running mate.
Before we let you go, any comment on reports, including from CBS News, that Manchin is mulling over a potential run?
I've not heard that, so you're just telling it to me for the first time.
Breaking news.
I think that Vice President Harris is going to be the nominee. But look, if other people want to throw their hats in the ring, I mean, this is the Democratic Party. We welcome that. That's what a democracy is all about.
Congressman Seth Moulton, thanks for coming by.
Okay, thank you.
President Biden has spent more than half a century in politics. We'll look back at his career and take a look at his legacy. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
As we wait to see how things shape out with the 2024 presidential election, now that President Biden is stepping aside, CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett looks back at his political legacy from his days as a 29-year-old U.S. Senator until now.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
Joe Biden's presidency began on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, where only days before, America bore witness to insurrection.
We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was born in 1942. Biden played football at the University of Delaware and attended law school at Syracuse University. By 1972,
if you like what you see, help me out. If not, vote for the other fellow.
He was elected to the United States Senate as a long shot, tell-it-like-it-is 29-year-old. Weeks later, his wife Nelia and their daughter were killed in a traffic accident that also injured sons Beau and Hunter. A single-father senator, Biden commuted from Wilmington to Washington aboard Amtrak to be home with his kids at night. He met Jill Jacobs, a teacher, on a blind date in 1975. They married 2 years later. His 2008 White House campaign went nowhere.
The vast majority of the people in Iowa haven't made up their mind yet.
When they did,
Joe Biden!
Barack Obama named Biden his running mate. In the White House, Biden oversaw stimulus spending and jumped ahead of the president by endorsing gay marriage.
What this is all about is a simple proposition. Who do you love?
Biden told President Obama to wait for better confirmation before launching the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Memorably, he said this about the passage of Obamacare. Biden passed on another run for the presidency in 2016 after his son Beau died of brain cancer. In 2020, he finished 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire, but bounced back to win South Carolina.
So all those who have been knocked down, counted out, left behind, let me say to you, this is your campaign. Let me introduce to you
Biden made history by picking California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate, the first woman of color nominated by a major party.
She's ready to do this job on day one.
That November, Biden defeated President Trump by 7 million votes. In his first 100 days, Mr. Biden accelerated vaccine distribution and strong-armed a $2 trillion COVID relief plan through a Congress with slender Democratic majorities.
The Honorable Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Biden appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court.
Okay, here we go.
And signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law.
Bravo.
However, a chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, coupled with inflation concerns and doubts about his comparatively lenient border policies, yielded unrelenting low approval ratings. Throughout his bid for re-election, Biden fought hard and spent tens of millions of dollars just to try to stay tied in the polls with former President Trump. After what many in his campaign and top Democrats regarded as a disastrous first debate performance, Biden could not stop the erosion of support among lawmakers and top donors. After ignoring pressure to drop out for more than 3 weeks, Biden announced his exit from the race shortly after the Republican National Convention. Biden frequently embraced optimism for America, and at times it sounded like his own internal fight against those who bet against him.
We are the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. And let's stay together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Biden, in the end, was persuaded to preserve his legacy rather than risk defeat for himself and Democrats nationwide. Steeped in the hard realities of Washington, Biden learned that loyalty and power, even when you are president and the presumptive party nominee, can slip away when the political tides and those closest turn against you.
Thanks, Major. President Biden is throwing his full support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. Coming up at the top of the hour, we take you outside the vice president's residence to learn what's next for her presidential bid. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Lindsay Reiser, joining you from our broadcast center in New York. We continue to follow today's breaking news. President Joe Biden has dropped out of the 2024 presidential race. In a statement, Biden said in part, quote, "While it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down." He's expected to address the nation later this week to give more detail on his decision. President Biden endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to pick up the torch and campaign for the White House. He said choosing Harris as his vice president has been the best decision he's made and offered his full support to her in the race. For more on the vice president's role in all of this, we are joined by CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She is outside the Naval Observatory where the vice president lives. Weijia, what has the vice president said since Biden's announcement?
Well, Lindsay, we have not seen the vice president in public today, so she certainly has not made any public remarks, but she did issue a statement describing the president stepping down from his re-election efforts as a patriotic and selfless act. She went on to say in the statement that she is honored to have the president's endorsement and that she intends to earn and win this nomination. Her last line in her statement, Lindsay, was, "We have 107 days until Election Day. Together we will fight and together we will win." So clearly the vice president has shifted gears already. She is embracing this support of her becoming the Democratic nominee for president. Of course, it's not official yet, but, she is already talking as though she is ready to take on this role.
So what is next for her? 107 days doesn't leave a whole lot of time for campaigning. And then there's choosing who's going to join her at the top of the ticket.
Right. So we know that even before the president stepped out of the race, she had on her schedule to campaign in Wisconsin, Indiana, as well as Massachusetts. And I am told that as of right now, there are absolutely no changes to her schedule. But of course, this is a very fast moving story that could have new developments minute by minute. As far as the question of her running mate, you're right. This is something that she is already grappling with and thinking about. Who should accompany her to be the vice president? And of course, this is something she knows very well about because she went through this very process as she was trying to get on the ticket when Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee. And so it's something she's familiar with. But in terms of a timeline, her team tonight saying they don't know exactly when that's going to happen. This is all brand new, and they are processing this as she decides exactly how to move forward.
Does the vice president face any notable challengers within the Democratic Party or Democratic Party adjacent?
So the only one so far, Lindsay, is West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who our colleagues have reported is quote, considering running for president against Kamala Harris. And so that could happen. It could be a contested convention. We just don't know yet. In fact, the DNC has said that they are going through the process as they would if there was a candidate to drop out, and that they would, be transparent in the coming days about this. But, until she actually clinches the nomination, it is true that she can be challenged, and it looks like Manchin is at least considering that. He hasn't announced a formal candidacy or anything. But of course, anytime you're talking about a campaign, whether it is for Senate or for president, money talks. And right now, the war chest that Biden had accrued will be transferred over to candidate Harris, if it is her. And we know that they are already raising a lot of money. I just got information from a donor source that they are raising tens of millions of dollars, Lindsay, since the president dropped out of the race. So there is the money factor as well.
Significant, because even though Biden outraised and outspent Trump in June, Trump does still have more in his war chest at this point. Weijia Jiang, thank you. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman joins us again from outside the president's home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Willie, what are we hearing from members of Biden's family?
Hey there, Lindsay. Good to be with you. You can bet that the family was close at hand when the president decided to make this decision. We're learning late last night. And the First Lady has been with the president as he has been recovering from COVID at the Rehoboth Beach, Delaware home. I want to bring up a statement from the First Lady's communications director. That statement says, quote, "Down to the last hours of the decision only he could make, she was supportive or whatever road he chose. She's his biggest believer, champion, and always on his side in that trusted way only a spouse of almost 50 years can be." And that's from Elizabeth Alexander, the communications director for the First Lady. We've been seeing statements from the president's granddaughter, from the president's family, also Hunter Biden giving a statement in light of his father stepping down from the political spotlight. He gave an emotional statement. I want to bring up part of that because he sent us quite a lengthy statement, but I want to read part of that for our viewers here. He says, "For my entire life, I've looked to my dad in awe. How could he suffer so much heartache, yet give so much of whatever remained of his heart to others?" And he goes on to say he is unique in public life today, in that there is no distance between Joe Biden, the man, and Joe Biden, the public servant of the last 54 years. And the latter part of that statement essentially said that he loved his dad and that he's very proud of him. So, Lindsay, the Biden family coming out in full support for the president in this difficult time that it certainly must have been for their family when the president made this decision, but coming to support him in this ultimate decision to bow out of the 2024 race, Lindsay.
Willie Inman, thank you. In a phone conversation with CBS News, former President Donald Trump says Biden's decision to drop out of the race is, quote, good for the country. Trump also said the Vice President Kamala Harris could be, quote, far less competent than Biden, and added the polls favored him against her. A recent CBS News poll found 51% of likely voters prefer the former president over Harris. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez in Palm Beach, Florida. So, Manuel, we already heard from the Trump campaign in this hour. We're starting to see some of the strategy come together. What are we hearing from them?
I think at this point, their strategy is to continue to try to portray the Democrats as a party that is in disarray. The former president did take to social media rather quickly after President Joe Biden's announcement and deemed him to be the worst president in American history and said he was not fit to continue to serve as president. But you mentioned that phone conversation that the former president had with CBS News' Bob Costa. He touched on a few more points, so let's talk about those. First, he did emphasize that this announcement, the news of the day, came as a shock to the country. You mentioned his comments on the Vice President Kamala Harris, saying, "I think she's no better than him. She could be far less competent." He also cast doubts on whether he would participate in the second upcoming presidential debate. And at the end, he says that he still believes that the election and the race will come down to the policies that are being presented by both parties. One note about the security situation here at Mar-a-Lago now that the president president, a former president, I should say, is here as the Secret Service has decided to shut down an additional roadway outside of the estate. That's a safety precaution that comes, of course, after the attempted assassination of the former president this weekend, and it's a change they say will be in place until at least through the election.
How is the campaign changing strategy now that Harris is possibly going to top the ticket?
You know, one thing I thought was of note when Bob Costa was talking about the conversation he had with the former president is that there was a sense of making it not just I'm running against Joe Biden. He says I'm running against the Biden administration. So I think you're going to see an orchestrated attempt here to tie the vice president as much as possible to President Joe Biden. That seems to have been at least the immediate reaction. We'll see how it plays out in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, that's what we heard in our show as well. And speaking of that, I did ask Trump campaign advisor Danielle Alvarez if they would commit to a debate, whoever was the Democratic nominee. And she wouldn't. She said it would depend on who would be at the top of the ticket. Are we learning anything about a possible debate?
Not at this point. I think the former president has said what he was going to say about the debate question, which was not necessarily a no to it, but just casting doubts. He not only referenced not knowing what the Democrats would be doing as far as selecting a nominee, but believing that the network in charge of that debate, ABC, would be biased and saying it should be on Fox News instead. So no clear answer there. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Noel Bojorquez, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, many leaders from across the globe have been sending President Biden messages of support and gratitude following his decision to drop out of the presidential race. CBS News foreign correspondent Ian Lee has the latest for us from London. Ian?
Hi, Lindsay. President Joe Biden worked closely with many world leaders. While his announcement didn't come as a complete shock, leaders will be watching closely to see who becomes the Democrats' new nominee.
A dramatic turn of events tonight in the race for the U.S. presidency.
Forced out from fighting the next election.
President Joe
Biden's seismic announcement drew quick international reaction. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he looks forward to continuing to work with him while praising what he describes as Biden's remarkable career. Israel's president posted praise for Biden and his support for the country over the decades. Russia took a more muted response, saying it's following developments, while the Czech prime minister hopes that a good president emerges from two strong and equal candidates. World leaders will want to tread a fine line when praising Biden's term in office so as not to alienate Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump. President Biden made his most recent appearance on the world stage less than 2 weeks ago at a NATO summit in Washington. But the chaotic pullout from Afghanistan by American forces will likely cast a shadow over Biden's foreign legacy, although the president will probably be remembered most for his staunch support for Ukraine. The country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, posted his gratefulness to Biden and his leadership in Ukraine's fight for freedom, while also praising bipartisan support in the United States. We're hearing from other world leaders like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, who called Biden a great man and true friend. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz thanked Biden for strengthening transatlantic cooperation as well as NATO. Lindsay?
Ian, we know this comes at a time of turmoil in terms of global geopolitics. I mean, we have the Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas war, everything else going on in the Middle East. We have China, Taiwan, the Philippines, North and South Korea. What does this mean for conflicts abroad?
Well, it could mean uncertainty. The one thing that world leaders want to see right now is strength, the United States support, the United States continuity of that support when it comes to these conflicts, especially in Ukraine. Europe has looked to the United States for leadership when it comes to that conflict. We know that Ukraine definitely has looked to the United States for help when it comes to fighting Russia. And we do know that former President Trump, as well as his vice president, nominee, are not too keen on keeping that support for Ukraine. So that does have a lot of people, a lot of leaders worried in these capitals. Also, when it comes to Taiwan, there's a lot of uncertainty if a second-term President Trump would support Taiwan if China decides to launch a military invasion of the island to try to retake it. President Biden has said multiple times that the United States would defend Taiwan. So a lot of world leaders are looking to see, will there be that continuity with this new nominee? A Harris nominee would likely continue what we've seen from Biden. But right now, there's a lot of uncertainty, not just with the Democratic nominee, but what this election will bring about.
Now, we know just in Michigan, J.D. Vance said to a crowd, sometimes when it comes to some of these world conflicts, we just have to stay out of it. Ian Lee, thank you.
I think it's very surprising news. Definitely not something I personally saw coming. I think it puts the entire election in a kind of a weird position, especially the Democratic Party having to find another candidate so close to election time.
I think it's a good decision. I think he didn't have a chance against Trump. Too many people were concerned about his age, which I was too.
Very surprising. I think some decisions need to be made, and hopefully it can come to a resolution soon. It's getting close to the wire, you know?
You just heard from voters across the country reacting to Biden's announcement that he is no longer running for re-election. And about the age question, a recent CBS News poll found a majority of registered voters believe President Biden does not have the mental and cognitive health to serve as president. That number is about 50-50 when it comes to former President Trump. CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins me now. Finn, what are you hearing from House Democrats?
Yeah, Lindsay, well, earlier today I spoke to a senior House Democrat who had just spoken to Vice President Harris. And during that call, I am told, the Vice President said that she did not want a coronation to the nomination, specifically saying the word coronation, which I think is notable because we do know that the DNC and other Democrats have been organizing and are on a trajectory, if you will, to have a virtual voice call in early August. Our own CBS News' Aaron Navarro reported that could come as early as August 1st.
What does that mean, Finn?
Well, essentially saying that, well, the coronation part is essentially that she wants to be seen as securing the nomination on her own merit, securing the nomination by getting the support of the delegates and those pledged delegates that President Biden has, and by essentially saying that she can consolidate her support. And we've already seen momentum surrounding the vice president. We've seen the momentum when you see the Congressional Black Caucus and other really top Emily's List and other top organizations, Democratic stakeholders who are part of that crucial foundation for any Democratic presidential run. You're already seeing that foment in support for her. So essentially, by saying she does not want a coronation, she is saying that she can get this on her own. And essentially, that looks better, frankly. Like if you can, by making one of your top issues that former President Trump, against former President Trump, is that he's a threat to democracy, by perhaps going the avenue of going through a virtual roll call where the DNC and the delegates essentially nominate her in that call ahead of the convention, it goes against that same argument. So that's a very notable part of this conversation. It's something we should look to see what happens in the next couple of days with Vice President Harris and her allies.
We've heard quite a bit of the GOP strategy that they're going to be embarking on, tying Kamala Harris to Joe Biden's policies, trying to connect her with what they perceive as a failure at the border. What does she bring to the campaign? What are they afraid of?
That's a great question. I do know that in speaking to senior Trump campaign officials prior to this segment, they did say that they feel very strongly and confidently that they can take on Vice President Harris. They believe that she is the ambassador for issues that they feel that they can strongly contrast, especially when it comes to the immigration and the border. However, to your point, as the presumptive nominee, and if she becomes the nominee, she immediately flips the age question, right? The age question that Joe Biden was getting from his critics, that now goes to former President Trump because of the age difference between him and Vice President Harris. So that was a key issue against Joe Biden. Also, she can get the support from black voters in crucial battleground states, and his Latino voters in crucial battleground states. Those are all core constituents that are part of the Biden coalition that she needs to win in November.
And perhaps reigniting some of the passion toward the reproductive rights argument. Finn Gomez, thank you. Well, Biden is the first sitting U.S. president to drop out of a race for re-election in more than 50 years. Presidential historian Doug Brinkley joins us next with a look at what this moment means for U.S. history and Biden's legacy. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
That's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
President Biden's decision to end his bid for re-election will go down in history. So will his official endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris as the person to take on Trump. Biden encouraged his party to unite behind her and show their support at the upcoming Democratic convention in Chicago. This historic passing of the torch comes more than half a century since the last time a vice president stepped in for a sitting president in a bid for re-election. Let's bring in presidential historian and professor of history at Rice University, Douglas Brinkley. Doug, good to see you. How do you think history will reflect on this moment?
Well, it was always a bit of a gamble for Joe Biden to run for re-election. When he, in 2020, inferred he was going to be there for one, but then he felt he needed to get in the game, and it's been a hard 2024 for President Biden. He had passed up doing a Super Bowl interview, which is this huge audience, but then suddenly he did a great State of the Union address. People thought, but donors thought, well, geez, maybe he's got gas in his tank. And then that debate that Biden did, the debacle with Donald Trump, will live forever in history. It's a strange, weird moment because it wasn't a gaffe or two gaffes or five mistakes. It was nonstop wreck. And 25 days now, it's been very daunting in America. We're going to be talking about this for a long time. The fact that President Trump was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then the spectacle of the Republican convention with Trump and Vance. And now there's an uncertainty. Where's the Democratic Party going? I would say the moment that is, does Kamala Harris have it to move and get momentum quickly? And will Joe Biden put wind in her sail immediately before everybody starts doubting her? She's been VP, which forces her to be, in a way, subservient to the president. So she hasn't been able to break out of the cast of Joe Biden, and now she must immediately. But we'll know within about 10 days whether she really is on her way to being the nominee, which I think she will be.
President Biden has been in public service for more than 5 decades. He was first nominated to the Senate in 1972. And actually, our Nancy Cordes asked at the NATO summit whether this decision was weighing on him in terms of his legacy. He said he wasn't worried about his legacy. He was worried about the future of the country. But that said, do you think we will remember today when we talk about his legacy?
Well, there's been a long time. I mean, you see President Biden they're shutting down anybody who's critical of them, and they want to say, aren't we great that we're a transformational presidency? Nobody did more in domestic politics since Lyndon Johnson. I'm the new FDR. They've been selling legacy all along. But in the end, nobody's going to say, wow, didn't the Biden team run a great campaign in 2024? It's been failure after failure. So in the history of campaign politics, this is how not to manage a campaign. But what's good is that Kamala Harris was chosen by Biden, the direct linkage in history. And President Biden can address the nation, but he needs to be a happy warrior and upbeat and say, this is part of my legacy, Vice President Harris. She's been an amazing fighter for social justice. She took on Barr and Kavanaugh on women's reproductive rights. He can't be mopey Joe Biden, and he cannot be legacy-driven Joe Biden. It has to be about Kamala Harris now. If you're going to pass on the baton, pass it on.
President Biden is the first president to step aside since Lyndon B. Johnson. That was in March of 1968. So we really are in uncharted territory this late in the game. But how did Johnson's decision affect the Democratic Party and the election then?
Well, I love the way you framed it. It's important, the exact framing. When he made his announcement at the end of March 68, spoke for 30 minutes to the country, and his reason was Vietnam quagmire. I'm going to have to deal full time with it, and I don't feel right campaigning. That has been an option for Joe Biden about Ukraine and Gaza, Israel, NATO. He could have gone that route. And Johnson got raves by the press. If you go back and read early April media, Johnson did the right thing. And then lo and behold, things fell apart. Martin Luther King Jr. killed. Bobby Kennedy won the California primary, and he's murdered. And then booted to Chicago convention. And the vice president of the United States, Hubert Humphrey, was stuck with the policies of Lyndon Johnson, including a hawkish position on the Vietnam War. And Eugene McCarthy, senator from Minnesota, was dove on Vietnam, and the streets got on fire in Chicago. And so the lesson here is, I think if Biden's going to get behind Kamala Harris, which he says he is, he really better do it full bore.
Doug Brinkley, thank you. Members of Congress are reacting to President Biden's decision to drop out, and we're also checking in on what some lawmakers are saying about Vice President Harris's chances in November. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
President Biden took the honorable path today, and he did it for all the right reasons. He did it because he knows that our democracy is on the line. He has such a record to be proud of, everything from the infrastructure bill everyone always talked about, to taking on the pharmaceutical companies, to bringing the world together and strengthening NATO, to bringing back the rule of law and putting in Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court. And my heart goes out to him and his family and everything they've done for their country. But he took the honorable path today.
That was Senator Amy Klobuchar speaking about President Biden dropping out. Several Democratic representatives and senators have already endorsed the vice president to replace Biden, but she still hasn't secured support from some key congressional leaders. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now. Scott, good to see you. Who haven't we heard from?
Well, the leadership of Democratic Party caucuses in the House and Senate haven't explicitly, full-throatedly endorsed Vice President Harris, but an awful lot of their members sure have. And we're talking about some of the lions of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. Mark Warner, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Patty Murray, the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee and third in the line of presidential succession. The battleground state senators and all those House caucus groups who have untold impact in any number of members, the Progressive Caucus, the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus. It's coalescing pretty quickly around Kamala Harris. It's the range of endorsements that's potentially most telling, Lindsay. It runs the gamut in the Democratic caucus, from the most progressive to the most moderate, from those in battleground states to those in very blue states. Institutionalists, those who are retiring, those up for re-election. She's got a broad base of endorsements, which makes her difficult to catch for anybody else who wants to jump in a race.
Who could that be?
Well, we've heard Joe Manchin flirt with the idea, flirt with a political future many different times, but he's not the right party right now. He's an independent. He'd have to become a Democrat again and try to move quickly towards a destination that is very fast approaching. But there's the other matter, the other names that have been circulating in the parlor games, the other possible names who'd be possible candidates have lined up behind Kamala Harris, too. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, Wes Moore, governor of Maryland, appears destined to endorse Kamala Harris in an event this week. Takes out a lot of competition when they're the ones championing your candidacy.
Well, I mean, could it also be that they are applying for a job? I mean, who is at the top of the VP contenders? And we need to remind people, it was only, 6 days ago since we learned that J.D. Vance was going to be Trump's running mate. How does that change the calculation? Well,
it's still got to happen quickly. I mean, it has to mobilize by early August, and that's a Herculean task to do in such short order. The names you see there on the screen are the names that have been circulated in Washington for quite some time. You see some blue wall state names there, too. States that a Vice President Harris would have to win in a presidential race: Michigan, Pennsylvania. But this is a parlor game that is going to be consuming Washington, D.C. as the work week begins tomorrow morning.
How complicated is the vetting process for a VP pick? Is this something that can be done in a matter of weeks?
It's going to have to be done in a matter of weeks, and presumably it wasn't catching people flat-footed today. There have been calls on President Biden to step down since June 27th, step down from the race. So presumably some of the party elders or some of those who'd be in the room were thinking about this question already. These are also known quantities. You're talking about statewide office holders who might be on a short list, who've been pretty well vetted by the voters and the opposition in their own home states. Who best serves as a running mate is the question to answer.
Scott McFarland, thank you. CBS News campaign reporter Nydia Cavazos joins us now from our D.C. bureau. So, Nydia, you have been on the campaign trail with the vice president. You spoke with her one-on-one earlier this month. That made a lot of news. And you've been to more Harris events than anyone I can think of. How is she received on the campaign trail?
Well, Vice President Harris, it's interesting because when we attend her campaign events, we always get a mixed reaction from voters. Initially, when I talked to them, prior to them listening to Harris, what we would often hear is, many voters saying, we haven't heard much of her from the past few years, but we're here, we're ready to support, and we want to listen to what she has to say. But when I check in with these voters right after, they say, I'm convinced and I'm fully supporting Vice President Harris. And, with all these calls that we had been hearing on President Biden, calls for him to drop out, I would ask voters, how do you feel about this? And I'm going to ask the hypothetical question. Would you support Vice President Harris potentially as a party's nominee if this came to be the situation? And what we would often hear from voters was we would 100% support her. And, some of the voters would express that they had some concerns for President Biden, given his age and everything that was going on in the news cycle. And so some of them would even add, we're okay with voting for President Biden, given that, one, we'll vote for anyone that's not former President Donald Trump. And we also have a reassurance that we know that Vice President Harris is standing behind President Trump behind President Biden in case anything happens. So we would get a lot of support from Harris on the trail.
What do we know about what her schedule was supposed to be this week and whether that's still going to be the case?
We're still waiting on further guidance from the Office of the Vice President. But initially, as of this morning, we were getting ready to head out to Milwaukee, Wisconsin on Tuesday. Then from there, we were going to go to Indianapolis, where Harris was going to be campaigning. And then she was going to end the week this weekend with a fundraiser in Massachusetts. Of course, this was still as of this morning. She was going to be doing it as the running mate to President Biden. And now it's unclear if she's going to continue with these campaign stops this week. And now, of course, we know that this is now her presidential campaign, and it is Harris for president.
Nydia Cavazos, thank you.
Thank you.
The country is still reeling from President Biden's stunning announcement today. We'll hear how voters in one key battleground state are handling his decision to drop out and how it impacts their choices at the ballot box. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep cleaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
I just didn't feel like he was mentally capable to run this race. And also, I mean, yes, I am Republican, but I also felt like it was also to a disadvantage for him and his party to also stay running. So it was kind of a win for both sides. I feel like the Democrats will probably not feel like that, but I do feel like that was probably the best decision.
I never thought that he was fit to begin with, just because of his interviews and people talking to him. He's always lethargic, or he can't answer questions straight and direct. He always has to have somebody in his ear, always has to have somebody direct him. I just don't think he's fit for presidency.
Honestly, it was kind of a little bit of a relief. Not to be like, not to say that I'm against like the Democratic Party and stuff like that. I just don't think he was an ideal candidate for my generation and stuff.
People across the country are reacting to the news that President Biden is stepping down from the 2024 race, and that includes voters in some key battleground states. Many of them weighing Kamala Harris's chances of beating Donald Trump if she becomes the Democratic nominee. CBS News producer Elizabeth Campbell joins us now from Phoenix, Arizona. So, Elizabeth, you were talking to voters there in the battleground state. What are you hearing?
From Democrats, we are hearing an overwhelming sense of relief, but they say that they're hesitant about Vice President Kamala Harris stepping up in that role of running as president. They think she has an uphill battle ahead of her. Take a listen to a little bit more of what those voters told me today.
I do not. Again, she hasn't shown us, her supporters, enough. I mean, we saw the most of her when she got voted in. So since she's been in this position, we saw her do a few fundraisers, and that's it.
I don't feel like she would also be like my vote and stuff like that. I don't feel like she would also hear me out either. I feel like I need somebody who hasn't been heard yet as my candidate.
Now, Vice President Harris, or any Democrat who claims the top of the ticket, is going to have a condensed period to try to sway over those undecided voters.
So on the other side, we saw a pretty unified Republican Party behind their candidate this past week at the RNC. What are you hearing from Republicans?
Republicans we talked to today are just full of confidence. They say it doesn't matter who runs against the president, that they think the former President Trump has this on lock. Now, take a listen specifically about what they had to say about whether Vice President Harris can defeat former President Trump.
No. Honestly, where has she been the last 2 years? We haven't heard anything from her, and now she's going to run for president. It's kind of peculiar, so I don't foresee much happening with that.
Well, I still feel like Trump's going to do better.
Just based off of recent events, his polls are skyrocketing, and I think he's just already secured the presidency.
And we've already seen those anti-attack Kamala Harris ads here on the airwaves in Phoenix. So Republicans tell me they're not changing their strategy, but that they're ready to go.
Senator Mark Kelly's name has been floated as a possible VP pick. What are you hearing?
Oh, if I knew who she was going to pick, I'd be a much richer woman. We can report that CBS News is hearing that Senator Mark Kelly is in the discussion.
What can you tell us about him?
We can know that he is very popular. He has tweeted out his support today for Kamala Harris. He has endorsed her. He has a record from both his time as an astronaut and here in a swing state. So he's certainly being looked at by many people in the inner circle.
Is he also being looked at? I mean, I've seen a lot of Arizona local media. I'm from Arizona. I read a lot of what Arizonans are talking about. I've seen his name a lot in Arizona media. Is his name really in like the inner circle in terms of the national politics as well?
I think he's going to have some work to do there. I think no matter who the vice president picks, there is going to be some who they get to know as the vice president candidate. A lot of people outside of Arizona know him, of course, from his time as an astronaut. He likes to lean on that a lot. I think it is going to be him trying to remind people he has done what he has in the Senate and get Americans to recognize Senator Mark Kelly for the senator that he is.
Elizabeth Campbell, thank you.
Thank you.
For more, CBS News political contributor Joel Payne joins us now. He's Democratic strategist and chief communications officer for Move On. So, Joel, good to see you. What is your reading right now? Because if you listen to Democrats, everybody is united and everything is great. And if you listen to Republicans, Democrats are in disarray.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what you would expect to hear on a day like today. I think the word that you cited, or maybe it was your colleague who cited it, was relief. And I do think a lot of Democrats are feeling relief. There's relief that this process of President Biden affirming his candidacy or affirming that he'll step aside from his candidacy is a relief. And I think also just the fact that there is a different choice now that Democrats have to make, and not just base Democrats, but moderate voters, voters in the middle who Democrats are hoping to bring back into their coalition that they had in 2020 and they'd like to have again in 2024. There's just relief. One thing I think that's interesting here is that, President Biden was somebody who really did not perform that well in the 2020 presidential Democratic primary. And essentially the party came together and said, you are the one who can beat Donald Trump, so we're going to get behind you. There was an interesting bookmark or coda to that over the last few weeks where you saw Democrats come together and say, unfortunately, President Biden, we don't think that this is your time and we think you need to pass the baton. And I can tell you so many Democrats I'm speaking to have so much gratitude and appreciation for President Biden for making that selfless, patriotic decision. And I think you're going to hear a lot of love for President Biden in coming days and hours.
That said, another race is just beginning. So what would be your advice to Democrats to counter GOP attacks, which we're already starting to hear?
Well, I think Democrats almost have to start anew. Like the campaign that was running until about 1 o'clock today doesn't exist anymore. There's a new campaign. There's a new person, presumably at the top of the ticket, assuming Kamala Harris is able to do, as she said, earn and win the Democratic nomination. And I think a fresh message and a fresh unified approach to defining Republicans would be in order. I'd imagine a message that would work really well in this environment is turning the page. Now the age issue is on the other foot. It's an issue that Democrats are going to put Republicans on the defensive about because they want to elect the oldest president in the history of this country now, as Donald Trump would be. And they want to go back to an era, to somebody from the baby boomer generation. That is a decision that Republicans now are going to have to wrestle with making. And so I can tell you the Democrats I'm talking to are feeling good that they have the high ground on some of those arguments that they kind of felt like they were disadvantaged about going into the last few weeks.
Joel, Act Blue, which is a fundraising platform, has posted on X that grassroots supporters, as of 9 p.m. Eastern, have raised $46.7 million through Act Blue following Harris's campaign launch. They say it's the biggest fundraising day of the 2024 cycle. How does fundraising, we know that you can only go as far as your dollars can take you. How big of a piece of the puzzle is fundraising?
Yeah, to me, it's an indicator of energy. And what energy does, energy brings friends to register and to vote. Energy knocks on doors. Energy makes calls. And that's what Democrats have sorely needed. The public opinion polls that we've seen, particularly the CBS polls, where you've seen President Biden up until this point trailing Donald Trump, he's trailing with traditional Democratic constituencies. And it's because he could not get those groups excited and mobilized to show up. That's why his team tried to come up with that early debate idea last month, which obviously did not go the way that they planned. But I think now you're going to see Democrats get a fresh shot in the arm of energy. I imagine you'll see big fundraising numbers, not just on the official side with the Harris campaign and with Democrats up and down the ballot, but you'll also see it in outside groups who are going to be helping to define Republicans and helping to boost up and have the back of Kamala Harris. I think you'll see a fresh injection of energy. And I think the Democrats I'm talking to are hoping to go into the convention in Chicago next month with a lot of wind at their back, which will be a change because they've been on their heels the entire cycle, it seems like, up until now.
Joel Payne, thank you.
Thank you.
If Kamala Harris is the Democrats' choice to run atop the ticket in November, who might be her running mate? We're going to look at some of the potential options next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
How would you say Tony and Nate?
You mean not say? Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Billy Crystal. Guess who's in the house? Look at his outfit. Hey, give me some love, baby.
Would your mother like me?
My mother does love me.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
I swear they should have a camera during the commercial. You have such a good time here.
I do recognize the urgency of the moment. As we head towards our convention in Chicago in August, I think the most important thing we can do is come together. And Vice President Harris has an incredible legacy of success and accomplishment as a senator and vice president. I do not expect a serious challenge to her nomination, but let's let that work itself out in the coming weeks and focus today on what a big contribution to our nation our president has made.
That was Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware reacting to President Biden's endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. After announcing he's out of the race, he did make that endorsement on social media today, saying that Harris should top the Democratic ticket. But that leaves one big decision. Who will Harris pick as her running mate? CBS News' Christian Benavides explores some of her options.
What will the Democratic ticket look like? All eyes are now on Vice President Kamala Harris, who was endorsed by President Biden. Harris has been on the campaign trail this week.
The most existential, consequential, and important election of our lifetime.
The vice president has a long career as a prosecutor, served in public office as the district attorney in San Francisco before becoming the state attorney general and then a U.S. senator representing California. She gained attention in 2018 for her interrogation of then Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh.
I'll repeat the question. Can you think of any laws that give the government the power to make decisions about the male body?
I'm not thinking of any right now, Senator.
Harris was part of a crowded Democratic field vying for the nomination in 2020 before Biden picked her as his running mate. If Harris is at the top of the ticket now, there's a long list of potential VP contenders, all of whom have their own presidential ambitions, including Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. If she's chosen, it would be the first all-female presidential ticket. California Governor Gavin Newsom, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg are also possible contenders. It's not yet clear if all of President Biden's delegates will line up behind Harris. CBS News polling shows while she measures up stronger than Biden against former President Donald Trump, she still trails him, and some Democrats would prefer an open primary process during the convention. Christian Benavides, CBS News.
Well, you have been watching our special coverage of President Biden dropping out of the 2024 race. Our coverage continues throughout the night. Thanks for staying with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's the